I would like to introduce you to Professor Bob Jessop, Distinguished Professor of Sociology at Lancaster University. I'm Karim Knio. I'm an Associate Professor at the Erasmus University Rotterdam Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. We have just published a new book with Routledge, The Pedagogy of Economic, Political and Social Crises, Dynamics, Construals and Lessons. As you can see, the title is quite long. And actually, I would like to ask Bob a very quick question. I mean, especially in relation to what we are witnessing now when it comes to Brexit, do we have, since our book is all about the pedagogy of crisis, do we have a crisis in relation to Brexit or multiple crises, or what kind of crisis? What do you think in relation to this?
Okay, I've written on this topic and I say that we could look at the Brexit referendum as an event, but it's also the preliminary culmination of a continuing organic crisis of the British state. Many people interpret it purely economically or politically, but I think the reason that we got to the Brexit referendum was the sheer incapacity and incompetence of the British state in many respects, where the European Union was the scapegoat. You didn't blame the British state or the British economy for our problems, you blamed the European Union. And that's the background to the referendum, but it's also the reason why 2.5 years continuing after the referendum result, we still haven't found a way out. We can't find the exit. And the British state is proving itself incompetent in dealing with the aftermath of the referendum result, both at the level of the official state apparatus, no preparations compared with what's going on elsewhere in Europe, a complete impasse in Parliament, the treatment of Brexit as if it's purely an internal problem for the Conservative Party, without any attempt to consult with other parties, to have citizens' juries, to try to resolve the problem in terms of a national spirit, and collapse of civil society and civility, increasingly toxic atmosphere, and so forth. So many of the themes in the book would be very powerfully applied to the British context, but with far less hope and optimism than we find in the individual chapters in the book. It's a much more doom-laden story. So one of the favourite themes in British politics at the moment is the politics of fear, and looking at it as a disinterested observer, I have a lot to worry about in terms of the sheer incapacity of British state, the political class, the media and so forth, really to address the magnitude of the crisis that we have.
In the book, we've also intertwined the complex interaction between different sorts of learning, because we were researching the nexus between nature of crises and organizational learning. We've distinguished, for example, between the learning into, in, about, and from. How could we actually transpose these particular complex ways of learning in relation to the current Brexit situation?
Okay, I mean, if I can backtrack just one moment, we distinguish also between crises in a system and crises of a system. The British political regime and the British economy have been experienced crises of, that is to say, fundamental crises for a long period of time. So we shouldn't be thinking about Brexit as a referendum that occurred in 2016. My interpretation is it's a symptom of the continuing organic crisis of the state and British society. So the question then is, how do our distinctions apply? And I think we can say that in a certain sense, the Brexit referendum result was a major shock in terms of producing a crisis in the acquired habits of interpreting Britain. There's a very strong sense of nostalgia. There's a sense that we ought still to be, if not the superpower, at least a major power in the world. So we've regained control but we can't do anything with that control. We have a 19th century notion of free trade, that countries trade with each other in terms of products they produce. We haven't yet learnt about global value chains and so forth. So two things have come as a major shock to the media, to the governing class, that the business community is known for a long time, that no state is an island, but that we need to pool our sovereignty rather than to share it. And that it's not countries that trade with each other, but firms that trade with each other in interlocked systems. And we're finding that a lot of promises were made, but basically fantasy promises that are undeliverable. And they used to say about debt, that debts that can't be paid won't be paid in terms of global crisis. I'm reminded when I look at Brexit of one of my school teachers when I was 15 years old asked me what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. The only answer is an unimaginable event. And what we're finding is the British crisis at the moment is an immovable object, Theresa May, and an irresistible force, the 29th of March, and nobody can imagine what is happening to the British economy. Nobody has the faintest idea what will be happening in 2 months' time. And there is such an impasse that it really is a sign of the crisis of the state, a state totally incapable of making a major decision, which is essentially an issue of life and death to British society and British economy. So we've learnt nothing. Are we learning something about the crisis? This is the second distinction. So learning into crisis, we've suddenly discovered our fantasies no longer hold. Are we learning about the crisis? Yes, but there are many different standpoints. So different social forces, different political forces are learning about the crisis from their standpoint. So it's not an opportunity for people to overcome their prejudices. It's an opportunity for people to redefine their prejudices. So they're discovering what doesn't work, reinterpreting that from their particular perspective, and asking for something else that won't work. And that's where the impasse comes from. Everybody is learning about the crisis, but there's no convergence around the lessons being drawn.
Standpoint reflexivity.
Standpoint reflexivity, but also then reinforcing the standpoint. But there's another aspect of the pedagogy of crisis, is the pedagogy of crisis about learning by doing. And what I think we can say is that a large number of people are reassessing their faith in British politics, in the future of the economy, and so forth. And in terms of pedagogy, I think I could say that in one sense it was too late to learn when we held the referendum, because the British system doesn't deal with referenda very well. They're always a disaster for a complicated question. So it's too late to learn. The lesson should have already been learned. Don't hold referendums on issues like this. And it's too early to learn, because until we crash out or we cancel Brexit, there won't be an opportunity for people to rethink how we got into this mess. So in actual fact, we're in a learning hiatus. Lots of lessons being learnt, non-convergent, chaotic, etc. But I think that it will be almost a catharsis when the dimensions of the disaster become apparent. So pessimism of the intellect is justified for at least another year. Optimism of the will in the medium term, and I think that will be cathartic as long as it's properly handled in mass media and social media, because the outcome of the Brexit referendum result has been a disaster from the viewpoint of the level of toxicity of public discourse, and even the mainstream media, let alone social media, have really seriously mishandled the way in which it's been debated. So judges are the enemy of the people, politicians are betraying us, and we're still blaming many of the victims as well. So it's a really sad period to be living through.
Thank you.